Chapter 1: The Crash Expanded. Brandon Hale never intended to raise an alien. He wasn't a soldier, a scientist, or anyone important. He was just a salvager, a scrapper working the edge of the galaxy, far from the gleaming cities and bustling trade routes. His world was broken ships and forgotten places, a life of rust, debt, and quiet survival. He especially never intended to raise a predator, and certainly not the last living pet of the Empress herself. But fate doesn't ask permission. It was supposed to be a routine salvage run. The comm chatter that night had been unusually quiet, and the skies over Astor's Reach, a half-abandoned mining moon, were clear. Brandon had just finished hauling the last of the stripped power cores into his skimmer when the crash lit up the sky. A streak of fire cut across the atmosphere, trailing thick smoke as it tumbled toward the valley floor. Brandon stared in shock. Shuttles didn't just fall out of the sky. Not here. Not on the edge of nowhere. His first instinct was to ignore it. Crashes meant trouble. Trouble meant people, Imperials, bounty hunters, corporate security, people who wouldn't take kindly to a salvager looting their wreckage. But the fire burned bright, and curiosity gnawed at him harder than caution. He strapped on his respirator, grabbed his salvage kit, and jumped onto his skimmer, racing across the rocky plains toward the crash site. The smell of scorched metal hit him before he even reached the wreckage. The shuttle had carved a deep trench into the valley floor, its twisted hull still smoldering. Brandon's heart pounded as he approached. His boots crunched over debris, charred panels, broken crates, scorched weapons. The shuttle's insignia was unmistakable. Imperial. His gut twisted. Salvaging Imperial wrecks was dangerous, but it could also be the biggest payday of his life. He carefully stepped through the crumpled interior, his flashlight cutting through the haze of smoke and drifting ash. Bodies, what remained of them, were scattered along the corridor. Burned, crushed, some torn apart by something. Then he found the containment bay. 3 cryopods lined the wall. 2 were shattered, the reinforced glass cracked and blood smeared across the edges. Whatever had been inside those pods was long gone, or dead. But the third one was intact. The control panel flickered weakly, and inside the pod, curled tightly in pain, was a cub. Brandon's breath caught. The creature was like nothing he'd ever seen. Its black scales shimmered faintly under the emergency lights, almost like liquid metal. Sharp, delicate spines lined its back and tail. Its limbs were powerful but small, its claws retractable. Its chest rose and fell with ragged, uneven breaths. Its eyes, enormous, violet, intelligent, locked onto Brandon's. It was terrified, and it was alone. Brandon hesitated. It was a predator. That much was obvious. The structure of its limbs, the sharpness of its teeth, the tension in its muscles. Even in this weakened state, it radiated danger. But it was just a cub. Injured. Abandoned. Something inside Brandon shifted. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But he wasn't the kind of man who could leave something to die. Not when he could save it. He overrode the pod's lock, wincing as the seals hissed open. The cub whimpered, weakly curling its tail around itself. "Easy," Brandon whispered, his voice softer than he thought possible. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub didn't move. Brandon carefully lifted it, surprised by how light it was. It trembled in his arms but didn't resist. Its scales were warm, its breathing shallow. "You're going to be okay," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was promising the cub or himself. As he carried it out of the wreckage, his comm crackled. A coded Imperial distress beacon had activated. A recovery team would be coming, fast. Brandon sprinted back to his skimmer, heart hammering. The cub clutched tightly to his chest. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what it was. But he knew he couldn't leave it behind. His decision would ignite a war, and he had no idea how far he would be willing to go to protect her. Chapter 2. The Cub. Brandon's outpost wasn't much. A converted mining shelter, tucked against the ridge, patched with scavenged metal, and insulated just enough to keep the worst of the cold out. It wasn't built for company. It certainly wasn't built for raising an alien predator. But that's where they ended up. Brandon kicked the door open with his boot, carrying the cub in both arms. His makeshift medbay, a narrow table littered with salvaged tools and cracked vials, looked woefully inadequate for what he was about to attempt. 18-7 set the cub down carefully. 18 winced and let out a faint, clicking sound that made Brandon's chest tighten. The injury wasn't fresh, probably a deep gash from the crash, but if he didn't clean it soon, infection would set in. Brandon wasn't a medic, but he'd patched himself up enough times to fake it. "Okay, kid," he said softly, gathering what little supplies he had. "This is gonna hurt." The cub watched him with those enormous violet eyes, unblinking, trusting or maybe just too weak to resist. He cleaned the wound, applied sealant paste, and bandaged it as best he could. The cub flinched, but didn't struggle. Brandon half expected it to lash out, but it didn't. It simply endured, trembling and chirping softly as though it somehow knew he was trying to help. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered, finally sitting back. He ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair and exhaled. "You're lucky I'm not one of the vultures. You'd already be cargo by now." He scavenged what little protein paste he had and offered it carefully. The cub sniffed, then licked it from his palm with a rough, sandpaper-like tongue. "That's it," Brandon smiled. "Not so bad, huh?" As the hours passed, the cub became more alert. It followed him with its gaze whenever he moved. It chirped, a soft, rhythmic sound, whenever he left the room, and it settled beside him when he returned. It started to follow him. At first, Brandon ignored it, brushing it aside with a gruff wave. But the cub didn't understand boundaries. It was at his heels when he was patching the skimmer, when he was cleaning his gear, even when he was trying to sleep. Eventually, he gave up and let it curl against him near the heater. "You're not exactly the company I planned on," he said one night, scratching behind one of the cub's small spines. The cub chirped, pressing closer. "Can't keep calling you cub, though, can I?" Brandon thought for a long moment. Names mattered. "Nix," he said finally. "Yeah, that suits you." Nix tilted her head, repeating the sound, a soft purr that almost sounded like his voice. She seemed to like it. Over the following days, she healed quickly, faster than he expected. The gash on her side sealed almost completely within a week. Her movements grew more fluid, her balance sharper, and she began to test her limits. Stalking his tools, leaping over crates, chasing the small, scurrying sandhoppers that crept into the outpost. Brandon started to notice more. The precision in her steps, the way she could freeze, absolutely still, her body low to the ground in a perfect hunting stance. The way her pupils narrowed to razor-thin slits when she locked onto something. She was a predator, born to hunt, built to kill. But she wasn't just instinct and muscle. She was intelligent, far more than he expected. She watched him with a curious intensity, mimicking his gestures, chirping in response to his words, following his routines as if she were learning them. And despite everything, she trusted him. Brandon had no idea what he was doing. He'd worked with animals before, domesticated cargo beasts, even a few semi-wild scavengers, but nothing like this. Nix was different. He knew he should have reported the crash. He knew he should have called the local guild, turned over what he found, collected his salvage fee, and walked away. But each time he thought about letting her go, about handing her over to the Empire or to anyone else, he found himself unable to move. He'd already made his choice the moment he opened that pod. Nix was his responsibility now. One morning, while repairing a transmitter array, Brandon caught a faint signal on his receiver, a distorted transmission bouncing across local frequencies. "Imperial patrol en route. Asset recovery in progress. Secure the quadrant. Dead or alive." His blood ran cold. They weren't just looking for the crash site. They were looking for something that survived it. Bounty hunters arrived first. 2 grizzled mercenaries who showed up at the salvage outpost 2 sectors over, asking questions, flashing the Imperial crest. Brandon caught wind of them through the comm channels and packed Nix onto his skimmer before they even got close. He fled deeper into the ridge valleys, moving from shelter to shelter, using old mining tunnels and dead communication hubs to stay ahead. But it wasn't enough. The bounty hunters became Imperial scouts. The scouts became assassins. It was clear now. They weren't hunting Brandon. They were hunting her, and Brandon couldn't let them have her. His quiet life as a salvager was over. He strapped the makeshift saddle onto the back of his skimmer, tucked Nix into the side compartment, and gunned the engine. "Hang on, Nix," he said, gripping the throttle. "We're not staying here." As the skimmer roared across the plains, Brandon realized that whatever Nix was, whatever she meant to the Empire, they would stop at nothing to reclaim her. And he would stop at nothing to protect her.